It was a night like any other, or so Mark thought. The house was still warm from the heat of the oven, where Sarah had spent hours earlier preparing their Christmas Eve dinner. The children were restless, excited for the morning, eager for the presents that would await them under the tree. Outside, the cold wind howled, but inside, the house was filled with the hum of normal life. Or so it seemed. At exactly midnight, the door slammed shut. Mark stood frozen in the living room, staring at the empty doorway where his wife, Sarah, had just walked out. The echo of the slamming door still rang in his ears as he blinked, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah was gone. Just like that. Gone. His 4 daughters were standing in the corner of the room, silent, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had no idea what to do or what to think. They were just children, innocent and unaware of the turmoil their mother had been carrying inside her for so long. But now, they had no one to turn to. Mark's mind raced as he took in the scene. What had just occurred? Why had Sarah left without a word? Why on Christmas Eve? Why like this? Daddy? The voice of his youngest daughter, Emma, broke through his thoughts. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she clutched the stuffed bear she had received earlier in the day. Mark knelt down in front of her, trying to hold it together. "It's okay, sweetie," he said, though his own voice betrayed him. "We'll be fine. Everything's going to be okay." But inside, Mark was anything but okay. He felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath his feet. The woman he had built his life with, the woman he had loved for over a decade, had just walked out on him and their children. He couldn't fathom it. There had to be some kind of explanation, some reason for this madness. He looked around the room, trying to make sense of it all. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling, casting a warm glow on the room. The presents underneath it, wrapped in colorful paper, now seemed like cruel reminders of the joy that was supposed to fill their lives. How could this happen on a night like this? How could Sarah leave them behind? Mark's thoughts were interrupted when his oldest daughter, Lily, spoke up. She was the one who had always been the most perceptive, the one who could read people better than anyone. "Dad, what happened?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. Mark took a deep breath. He didn't have the answers. He didn't even know where to start. All he could do was try to comfort his girls, even though he felt as though he were falling apart on the inside. "I don't know, honey," he said softly. "I don't know." He turned back toward the door, almost expecting Sarah to return, to walk back in with an explanation, with some reason for why she had left so suddenly. But the door remained empty. The silence in the house was deafening. Mark's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, dialing Sarah's number, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she had just stepped outside for a moment. But after the 3rd ring, the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. No answer. "What's happening?" he muttered under his breath, his mind racing. What could have caused Sarah to leave so abruptly? They had had their struggles, of course, no marriage was perfect, but nothing had seemed this dire. Nothing had felt like this. "Daddy," Emma's voice was small again, "why did Mom leave?" Mark closed his eyes, fighting back the tears. How was he supposed to answer that? How could he explain something he didn't even understand himself? "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, swallowing hard. "But I promise we'll figure it out. We'll be okay." The next few hours passed in a blur. Mark tried calling Sarah again, but her phone went straight to voicemail every time. He even left her a message, though he knew deep down that it wouldn't make a difference. Something was terribly wrong, and no amount of pleading was going to bring her back. He had to face the reality of it. Sarah was gone. As the night dragged on, Mark did what he could to reassure his daughters. They were confused, of course, but they were still young enough to not fully grasp the gravity of the situation. They asked where Mom had gone and when she would be back, but all Mark could do was offer them empty reassurances. The truth was, he had no idea when, if, Sarah would return. The following days were even harder. Mark spent Christmas Day in a haze, his mind consumed with worry and confusion. The house, once filled with joy and laughter, now felt cold and lifeless. The children tried their best to make the best of things, but there was an undeniable sadness in the air. They ate their Christmas dinner in silence, the joy of the holiday now tainted by the absence of their mother. Mark didn't know where Sarah had gone. He didn't know why she had left. But one thing was clear, she wasn't coming back anytime soon. Weeks passed, and Mark tried to keep things as normal as possible for the girls. He kept up appearances for them, tried to keep their routines intact, even though his own world had been turned upside down. But the questions lingered, gnawing at him. Where had Sarah gone? Had she been planning this for a while? Or was something more sinister at play? And why hadn't she left any explanation? The more Mark thought about it, the more the mystery grew. The police couldn't help much. They filed a missing persons report, but there were no leads. Sarah had vanished without a trace. No one had seen her leave, and no one knew where she had gone. It was as though she had simply disappeared from their lives, leaving behind nothing but an empty house and unanswered questions. Mark wasn't ready to give up. He needed answers, for his sake and for the sake of his daughters. So, he kept looking. He checked with her friends, her family, anyone who might have known something. But no one seemed to know anything. Sarah had disappeared without a word, and no one could explain why. And then, after nearly a month of silence, a letter arrived. It was an unmarked envelope, the handwriting on it unfamiliar. Mark hesitated for a moment before opening it. What could this be? What could Sarah have left him? A clue? An explanation? Or perhaps an apology? Inside the envelope, there was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Mark unfolded it carefully, his heart racing. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as though written in a hurry. The words inside were simple, but they hit him like a ton of bricks. You don't know the truth about why I left. But soon, you will. What you find will change everything. Mark read the words over and over, unable to comprehend what they meant. What truth? What could possibly be so important that Sarah had to leave them behind, and why hadn't she told him sooner? The mystery deepened. Mark could feel the weight of the letter in his hands. He was no closer to finding answers, but now, the search had taken on a new urgency. Sarah had left a message. She had left a hint, a breadcrumb to follow. And whatever the truth was, it was something that would change everything. The journey to uncover what had really happened to Sarah had only just begun. The letter had opened a door, but the answers that lay behind it would be far more complicated, and more dangerous, than Mark could ever have imagined. And so, with no more than a cryptic message and a deep sense of dread in his gut, Mark braced himself for what was to come. What was the truth that Sarah had been hiding all this time? What had driven her to leave? And what would he find when he followed the trail that had just been set before him? Mark stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity. The words, "You don't know the truth about why I left. But soon, you will. What you find will change everything," lingered in his mind, as though they were carved into his very soul. He had read the letter over and over again, each time hoping for some new revelation, but all he could do was feel a growing sense of unease. What was Sarah trying to tell him? Why hadn't she come forward sooner? He set the letter down on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The woman he had spent the better part of his life with had left him without so much as an explanation, and now, months later, she was sending him cryptic messages that only deepened the mystery. The question gnawed at him relentlessly: what truth could be so important that Sarah couldn't tell him face to face? And why had she chosen to reveal it in this way, through a letter delivered so coldly, without a return address or any indication of where she was now. Mark's thoughts were interrupted when Lily, his oldest daughter, entered the room. She had grown quieter over the last few months, her cheerful demeanor replaced with a sense of uncertainty that seemed to mirror Mark's own confusion. She had always been the observant one, the one who noticed the smallest details, and it was clear that she, too, was struggling with their mother's disappearance. "Dad?" Lily's voice was tentative, almost hesitant. "What did the letter say?" Mark swallowed hard. He hadn't told the girls about the letter yet. He wasn't sure how to explain it to them, especially when he didn't even understand it himself. "It's from your mom," he said, his voice low. It's hard to explain right now. But she's trying to tell me something. Something big." Lily frowned. "What do you mean, something big?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. "I don't know yet, Lily. But whatever it is, it's something that's going to change everything." He didn't want to say more. He didn't want to scare her with the thoughts that were swirling in his mind. But the truth was, he was scared too. The more he thought about the letter, the more questions it raised. Who was Sarah really? What had she been hiding all this time? "I'm going to find out," Mark said, more to himself than to Lily. "I have to." Lily looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity, but she didn't say anything more. She knew that Mark was determined to get answers. It was just who he was. But now, more than ever, she needed him to find those answers, not just for himself, but for all of them. The days that followed were filled with a sense of urgency. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that every second that passed without finding Sarah meant that she was slipping further and further from his reach. But where could he begin? How could he uncover the truth when all he had was a letter with a vague promise of revelation? He started by retracing Sarah's steps. It wasn't much to go on, but it was all he had. He went through her personal belongings, hoping to find something, anything, that might point him in the right direction. But Sarah had been meticulous in keeping her life separate from his, as though there were parts of her he wasn't meant to see. Even after all their years together, there were corners of her life that he didn't know about. He never thought to question it before, never suspected that she was hiding anything from him. But now, everything seemed suspicious. Mark sifted through drawers and boxes, looking for clues, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual things: papers, bills, photographs. There were no signs of another life, no hints of something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. It only made the mystery more frustrating. He had been so close, but it felt like every door he opened led to another dead end. Frustrated, Mark turned. Oh, Sarah's friends. He made calls, sent messages, hoping to find someone who might know something about her sudden departure. But to his surprise, most of them were just as confused as he was. They hadn't heard from Sarah in weeks, and none of them had any idea where she might have gone or why she left in the first place. Even the people who had been closest to her seemed to have no answers. It was as though Sarah had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind no trace of herself, no explanation for her actions. Mark was starting to feel hopeless when a breakthrough came, of sorts. He had been going through some of Sarah's old papers when he found something odd. Buried beneath a pile of receipts and old letters was an envelope, not unlike the one that had arrived a few days ago. The handwriting on the front was familiar. It was Sarah's. With shaking hands, Mark tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. This one wasn't like the first one. It was longer, more detailed, though still cryptic in places. He read the letter aloud to himself. Mark, I know you're looking for answers, and I know that you want to understand why I left. But what you don't know is that everything I've told you until now has been a lie. I never meant to deceive you, but I had no choice. There are things about my past that you will never understand, and I can't explain them to you without putting us all in danger. The truth is much darker than you think, and I don't want you to get caught up in it. Please, for the sake of our children, stop looking. It's too late for us now." Mark's heart sank. What was she talking about? The past? Danger? The more he read, the more it felt like Sarah was trapped in some kind of world that he couldn't reach, some life that he hadn't even known existed. The letter was full of hints, but no concrete answers. It only deepened the mystery. But there was one line that stood out to him: "The truth is much darker than you think." What could be darker than a wife abandoning her family on Christmas Eve? What kind of secret was Sarah hiding that she couldn't tell him? Was it something so terrible that it had driven her to leave without a word? Mark's mind raced. There was no way he could stop now. The answers were out there, and he was going to find them. But as he sat there, the weight of the letter in his hands, he began to wonder, what if Sarah was right? What if the truth was too dangerous to uncover? What if, by digging deeper, he was putting his family in more danger? The questions swirled in his mind, but one thing was certain: he couldn't stop. Not now. The next few days were a blur of activity. Mark called everyone he could think of who might have any knowledge of Sarah's past. He scoured her social media, looking for any clue that could lead him to an answer. He even reached out to some of her old acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years. But everything he found only seemed to lead to more questions. It wasn't until a chance encounter that Mark stumbled upon something truly shocking. One afternoon, as he was having lunch in a small cafe, he ran into an old colleague of Sarah's, Paul, a man Sarah had worked with years ago. Paul had been one of the few people who knew Sarah before Mark. Mark hadn't seen him in years, but something about the way Paul looked at him when they shook hands seemed off. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but also something else, something Mark couldn't place. After a few minutes of small talk, Mark couldn't help himself. He had to ask. "Paul, I don't suppose you've heard from Sarah recently, have you?" Paul's expression shifted, just for a moment. Then he quickly recovered, smiling politely. No. Haven't heard from her in a while." "Why?" Mark studied him closely. There was something strange about Paul's tone, something that made Mark feel like he wasn't being told the whole truth. "Do you know anything about her past?" Mark asked, keeping his voice casual. "Anything unusual?" Paul stiffened. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, after a long pause, he lowered his voice. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that, Mark. You should let it go. Sometimes, people disappear for a reason." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Paul's words were loaded with meaning, and he couldn't ignore the warning in them. He had stumbled upon something important, but it was clear that Paul wasn't going to be the one to help him uncover it. If anything, Paul seemed to be trying to shut him down. That was when Mark realized, there was more to Sarah's disappearance than he had ever imagined. And now, he was on the verge of discovering a truth that could shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman he had loved. The morning after his meeting with Paul, Mark found himself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents and letters that had accumulated in front of him. His mind felt clouded with confusion. The more he searched for answers, the more questions seemed to pile up. Every lead he followed only brought him to more dead ends. He had felt so close, so certain, that he was on the verge of uncovering the truth, but now, with every new revelation, he began to wonder if the truth was something he wasn't prepared to face. As he sifted through Sarah's old journals, Mark came across something that made his heart race. Tucked in between the pages of a worn-out notebook was a photograph of Sarah, but it wasn't like any photo he had ever seen. It was an old, black-and-white picture, and Sarah looked much younger. Her face was serious, almost somber, and she was standing next to a man who seemed oddly familiar. Mark felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't recognize the man, but there was something about the way Sarah was standing next to him that seemed wrong. There was a connection there that Mark couldn't quite place. Mark picked up the photo carefully, studying it closely. The man beside Sarah had sharp features, dark eyes, and a stern expression. He looked powerful, almost intimidating, and yet there was something in the way Sarah was looking at him, a look that suggested trust, maybe even fear. Mark's mind began to race. Who was this man? And why had Sarah kept this photo hidden all these years? Without thinking, he picked up his phone and typed a quick message to Lily. "Lily, I found something. A photo of Mom with a man. Do you recognize him?" It didn't take long for Lily to respond. Her message was short and to the point. "I don't recognize him, but I'll ask Grandma. She might know." Mark felt a small flicker of hope. Lily was right, his mother, Sarah's mother, might know something. If anyone could shed light on Sarah's past, it would be her. Mark hadn't spoken to her in years, but now seemed like the perfect time to reach out. He quickly dialed the number, the sound of the ringing phone echoing in the quiet room. After a few moments, the call was answered. "Mark?" It was Sarah's mother, her voice as familiar as it was distant. "What's wrong? Is something happening with the girls?" Mark's heart tightened. The last time he had spoken to Sarah's mother, it had been an uncomfortable conversation. There had always been tension between them. His mother-in-law had never quite approved of him, but he had hoped that, given the circumstances, she might be more willing to help him now. "No, everything's fine with the girls," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But there's something I need to ask you about. It's about Sarah. I found something, and I'm not sure what it means." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Sarah's mother spoke, her voice tinged with hesitation. "What did you find, Mark?" Mark paused for a moment, then spoke the words he had been dreading. "I found a photograph of Sarah with a man. I don't recognize him, but I think you might. Do you know who he is?" There was a long silence before Sarah's mother replied, her voice suddenly tense. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your wife never told you about him?" "No, she never did," Mark replied, his frustration mounting. "I need to know, Janet. Please. Who is he?" Another pause. Then, Sarah's mother let out a deep sigh. "I think it's time you knew the truth, Mark. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but I suppose you've earned it." Mark's pulse quickened. The truth? What was she talking about? Was this the moment he had been waiting for? "The man in the photo," Sarah's mother continued, "his name is Victor. He's not just anyone, Mark. He's the reason Sarah left. He's the reason she disappeared." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's the connection between Victor and Sarah?" Sarah's mother was silent for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Victor is someone from Sarah's past, someone she thought she had left behind. But he's not just a part of her past, Mark. He's someone with a lot of influence. He's dangerous. And the truth is, Sarah didn't just leave you. She ran from him." Mark felt a cold rush of dread wash over him. "What do you mean, she ran from him? Is he a threat to us?" "Yes," Sarah's mother said, her voice trembling slightly. "Victor is not someone you want to mess with. He's not just a criminal. He's a man with connections, with power. Sarah was involved with him before she met you, but she thought she had broken free of him. But now I think he's found her again." Mark felt a chill in his bones. The revelation about Sarah's past, about her connection to this man named Victor, sent a jolt of fear through him. What kind of danger were they really in? And why had Sarah never told him about this man? "I don't know everything, Mark," Sarah's mother continued, "but I know that when Sarah left you, it wasn't just because she didn't love you anymore. She left because she was terrified. And I don't think she was running from just one thing. She was running from a lot of things. A lot of people. Mark's thoughts were spinning. He had always thought that Sarah had left because of something he had done, some failure on his part. But now, it seemed like there was a much larger and much darker story unfolding. There was so much Sarah had kept from him, so much she had been hiding, and Mark realized that the woman he had married was not the person he thought she was. "I need to find her," Mark said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "I need to know where she is, and I need to bring her home." Sarah's mother didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice was filled with concern. "Mark, you don't understand. If Victor is involved, you need to stay away. You need to leave it alone. There's nothing you can do to help her." But Mark wasn't listening. He had to find Sarah. He had to know the truth. And he was willing to face whatever danger lay ahead to get it. The next few days were filled with frantic searching. Mark followed every lead he could find, reaching out to anyone who might have information about Sarah's whereabouts. He combed through old records, searched online, and even visited places he knew Sarah had frequented in the past. But everywhere he turned, he found nothing. It was as though Sarah had vanished, leaving behind no trace, no clues. Then, one evening, as Mark was about to give up for the day, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from an unknown number, but something in his gut told him it was important. "Hello?" Mark said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Mark?" The voice on the other end of the line was low and distorted, as though the person was trying to hide their identity. "You're looking for Sarah, aren't you?" Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this? Where is she? What do you know?" The voice chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "I know more than you think, Mark. But if you want to find her, you'll need to play the game. You'll need to follow the clues. But be warned, the truth you're looking for, it's not something you'll want to hear." Before Mark could respond, the call was abruptly disconnected. He stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. The mystery had just deepened, and now, it was clear that someone else was involved, someone who knew far more than Mark did. Who was behind this? And what kind of game were they playing? The days after the cryptic phone call were filled with a deep sense of dread and unease. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone, somewhere, knew what he was doing. The phone call had only made things more complicated. Whoever had called him clearly knew more than they were letting on, and the cryptic message only left him with more questions. But one thing was certain, he had to follow the trail. The thought of Sarah's disappearance weighed heavily on Mark's mind. She had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no clue to where she had gone or why. The more he dug into her past, the more he realized just how little he really knew about the woman he had married. Sarah had kept so many secrets from him, secrets he now knew were far darker than he could have ever imagined. Mark had tried to push the doubts aside, to convince himself that there was a simple explanation, but every lead only seemed to take him deeper into a web of lies and deceit. He had uncovered the name of the man in the photo, Victor, and what he had learned about him chilled him to the bone. Victor was no ordinary man. He was a powerful figure in a shadowy world, a man with connections to criminal organizations and a reputation that made even the bravest men tremble. And now, it seemed, he was after Sarah once again. But what did Victor want with her? Why had Sarah run from him all those years ago? And why had she never told Mark the truth? It was time to find answers. Mark knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, someone who had connections, someone who could dig deeper into Victor's past. That's when he thought of Paul. Paul had always been a bit of a rogue, a man who operated on the fringes of the law but was good at getting things done. Mark wasn't sure if he could trust him completely, but at this point, he didn't have many options. He needed someone who could get him information that others couldn't. And Paul was the kind of person who could get things done, no questions asked. Mark picked up his phone and dialed Paul's number. The phone rang a few times before it was picked up. Yeah. Paul's voice was gruff, but there was a note of curiosity in it. He knew something was up. I need your help, Mark said quickly. I'm looking for someone. His name is Victor. I need everything you can find on him. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mark could hear the rustling of papers, the sound of Paul shifting in his chair. Victor? Paul finally said. What do you want with him? I don't know yet, Mark replied, his voice tense. But he's connected to my wife, and I need to find her. I think he might be the reason she disappeared. Paul's voice lowered, as though he was taking Mark's request seriously. Victor's a dangerous man. If you're getting involved with him, you better be prepared for what's coming. I don't have a choice, Mark said, frustration creeping into his voice. I need to know where Sarah is, and I need to know everything about this guy. All right, Paul said after a moment of hesitation. I'll see what I can do. But you need to be careful, Mark. You're messing with things that are bigger than you realize. I don't care, Mark said. Just get me the information. The line went silent for a moment before Paul spoke again. It'll take a few days, but I'll reach out when I have something. Mark hung up the phone, his mind racing. He had just made the decision to dive deeper into this world of danger, and there was no going back. But even as he tried to steel himself for what was to come, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had been hiding something more, something she had never wanted him to know. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's life began to feel like one endless search for answers. Each day brought new discoveries, new clues, but no answers. The more he uncovered about Sarah's past, the more distant she seemed. It was as though the woman he had loved was a complete stranger. It was early one morning when Mark received a text from Paul. The message was short but to the point. I've got something. Meet me at the usual spot. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, his mind already racing with thoughts of what Paul might have uncovered. The usual spot was an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place where Paul often did business. It was a rundown building, abandoned for years, but it was where people went when they needed to make deals without being seen. Mark had been there before, and he knew that Paul would be waiting for him inside. When Mark arrived, he found Paul standing near the entrance, his arms crossed and his face serious. Paul didn't look like the kind of man who cared about much, but today, he looked different, tense, as though he was about to deliver news he didn't want to share. Paul, Mark said, walking up to him. What do you have? Paul didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a folder from under his jacket and handed it to Mark. The weight of the folder felt heavy in Mark's hands, and he opened it slowly, afraid of what he might find inside. Inside the folder were photographs, grainy, black and white images that seemed to have been taken years ago. Mark's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the familiar face of Sarah. But she wasn't alone. In each photograph, she was standing next to Victor, always close, always with a look of apprehension in her eyes. It was clear that there was more to their relationship than Mark had ever known. Paul spoke, his voice low. These were taken years ago, back when Sarah was involved with him. But there's more. I dug deeper into Victor's background. You need to know what kind of man he is. Mark's eyes moved from the photos to the documents inside the folder. There were files detailing Victor's criminal activities, his connections to international syndicates, and his rise to power within the shadowy world of organized crime. Victor was no ordinary criminal. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who wielded influence in ways Mark couldn't even begin to understand. But there was something else that caught Mark's attention. There, buried in the paperwork, was a letter, one that had been written by Sarah herself. It was dated just before she had left. In the letter, she described her fear of Victor, the things he had done to her, and how she had no choice but to run. She spoke of threats to her life, threats to their children, and how she had been forced to sever all ties with her past. The letter ended with a chilling sentence: "If you ever find out what I've done, it will be too late." Mark felt his stomach twist as he read the letter over and over again. It was clear that Sarah had been caught in something far beyond her control, something she couldn't escape. But what had she done? What secrets had she been keeping from him? Paul watched Mark closely, his eyes narrowing as he waited for his reaction. Mark slowly folded the letter and placed it back in the folder. "What else do you have?" Paul hesitated before answering. "There's more. But it's not something I can get for you right now. You're going to need to be ready for the truth. It's not going to be easy." Mark's mind was already reeling, but he knew that he couldn't back down now. He had come this far, and he was determined to find out what had happened to Sarah, no matter the cost. Mark sat in the dimly lit room, the folder from Paul still sitting on the table in front of him. His fingers brushed over the edges of the paper, but he didn't open it again. Not yet. The weight of the letter, the photographs, and everything that had been revealed so far pressed heavily on his chest. The truth was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. His mind raced as he tried to connect the dots, but nothing made sense. Sarah, the woman he had known for years, the woman who had given him 4 children, was hiding something. Something dark. Something dangerous. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she left. The final words she had said to him, the way she had kissed him goodbye as though she would never see him again. Had she known then what she was running from? Did she know something about Victor that had put them all in danger? The letter spoke of fear, of threats that had been made against her and their family. And yet, Mark couldn't understand why she hadn't told him. Why hadn't she come to him for help? They had always been partners, always shared everything, didn't they? So why hadn't she trusted him with the truth? A sudden thought struck him. What if she didn't want him to know? What if she had kept the secrets to protect him and the children? It was a chilling thought, one that sent a cold shiver down his spine. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor, the sound jarring in the silence. He had to do something. He had to know more. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and headed out the door. His mind was set. He couldn't wait any longer. The time for digging through papers and waiting for answers was over. He needed to confront the one person who might hold the key to everything, Victor. Mark didn't know where to start, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop until he found Sarah and got the answers he was looking for. Hours later, Mark stood at the edge of a rundown building in the industrial district. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. It had been a long day of searching, and he had finally tracked down a lead. A man named Tony had been working with Victor years ago, and he had recently been spotted in this area. Mark had no idea where Victor was, but if he could get to Tony, maybe he could find out more. Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he walked through the alleyway, he glanced over his shoulder, checking for anyone who might be following him. The last thing he needed was to be caught off guard. He had already made a few enemies in the process of digging into Victor's past, and he knew he was playing a dangerous game. The building ahead of him was old, the windows cracked, the door slightly ajar. Mark hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, the floor creaking beneath his feet as he moved further into the building. There was no sign of anyone at first, but Mark's instincts told him he wasn't alone. He could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, and then a voice, low and gravelly, echoed from the shadows. "You're looking for trouble, aren't you?" The voice belonged to a man who stepped out from the corner, his face shadowed by the dim light. Mark didn't flinch. "Tony?" he asked, his voice steady. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in Mark's appearance. He studied him for a moment before giving a short nod. Yeah, that's me. What do you want? I need to know about Victor, Mark said. I need to know where he is, and I need to know what happened to Sarah. Tony chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you don't want to go digging around in Victor's business. Trust me, it's not a place you want to be. Mark stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Tony's. I don't care. I need to find her. My wife. She's been missing for years, and I think Victor has something to do with it. Tony's expression hardened, and he took a step back, as though weighing his options. Mark could see the hesitation in his eyes, but there was something else too, fear. You don't get it, do you? Tony said, his voice low. Victor doesn't let go of people. Once you're in his world, you're in it for good. Sarah, she made a choice a long time ago. A choice that has consequences. You want answers? Fine. But you have to understand something. There's no going back once you know the truth. Mark's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? What happened to her? Tony shook his head, glancing nervously around the room. Victor, he's not just a criminal. He's a man with power, and he's got connections everywhere. He controls more than you think. And Sarah, she got caught in all of it. She was part of something bigger than just running away. She was involved in something she couldn't get out of. Mark's heart sank. What do you mean? Was she part of Victor's criminal activities? Tony looked around once more before speaking. No. It wasn't like that. But she made a deal with him. A dangerous one. A deal that involved the kids, too. Mark's breath caught in his throat. My children? What kind of deal? Tony's eyes darted toward the door as though he was afraid someone might hear. I can't say too much. But I can tell you this, Victor isn't the only one who has secrets. Sarah had secrets of her own. And the day she left, she wasn't just running away from him. She was running from something far bigger than you realize. Mark took a step back, trying to absorb what Tony was saying. So, what's the truth? Why did she leave? What did she get involved in? Tony sighed and rubbed his forehead, clearly torn. She got mixed up in something that started with Victor but wasn't really about him. It was about a debt, a dangerous debt that involved the people she was closest to. And when she tried to get out of it, she was forced to make a choice, stay and risk losing everything, or run and protect the people she loved. Did she choose to protect me? Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. Tony nodded slowly. She left because she thought you and the kids were better off without her. She thought she could keep you safe by disappearing. But she didn't, Mark said bitterly. She left us to wonder why she abandoned us. Tony met Mark's gaze. It wasn't that simple. She didn't have a choice. And if she had stayed, everything could have been worse. But you need to understand something, Victor is still looking for her. He doesn't forget. And now that you're digging around, you're in danger too. Mark's head was spinning. His world was falling apart piece by piece. Sarah, the woman he thought he knew, had made a decision to protect him and their children by running away, but in doing so, she had left him with nothing but questions and heartbreak. He felt a deep ache in his chest. How had it come to this? How could he have missed all the signs? Tony's voice broke through his thoughts. Look, I'll help you find her. But you need to be ready for what's coming. Because the truth is going to change everything. Mark stood still, trying to process it all. The past few years, the pain, the questions, it was all starting to make sense. But it wasn't the truth he had hoped for. It was worse. Victor was still out there, still a threat. And Mark was now caught in a dangerous game where the stakes were higher than ever. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The words Tony had spoken echoed in his mind as he made his way back through the alleyways of the industrial district. Sarah's betrayal, Victor's dangerous world, the threats that had followed her, all of it weighed heavily on him. But more than anything, the gnawing fear that his family was still in grave danger kept him up at night. For the past few weeks, he had been trying to track Sarah down, hoping to piece together the fragments of their shattered past. But nothing had prepared him for the truth Tony had shared with him. Sarah had chosen to leave, not because she didn't love him, but because she thought it was the only way to protect them. But protect them from what? And from whom? The mystery had become more complicated than he had ever imagined. Victor, a criminal mastermind with dangerous connections, wasn't the only threat looming over them. Sarah had been part of something far bigger. It was something that had caused her to make a sacrifice that had ripped their family apart. Mark couldn't let go of one thought: he had to find her. For himself. For their kids. For the family they once were. But the question remained, where was she now? Days passed as Mark relentlessly searched for more clues. The darkness of uncertainty loomed over him, but he wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. His family's future depended on finding Sarah, understanding the full scope of what had happened, and most importantly, protecting his children. Finally, after weeks of dead ends, a break came. One evening, as Mark was sifting through some old photographs, he received a call. It was from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he hesitated before answering. "Hello?" he said, his voice a mixture of hope and wariness. "Mark," a voice on the other end said, and his heart dropped. It was a woman's voice. One he hadn't heard in years. "It's me. Sarah." Mark stood frozen, unable to form words. After all this time, after all the pain, the anger, and the unanswered questions, she was finally on the other end of the line. "Sarah," he managed to whisper. "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me? I've been looking for you. We've been looking for you." "I know," she replied softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to put you in danger. I thought it would be better if you didn't know." "Better?" Mark's voice shook. "Better than what? You disappeared without a trace, and you left me with 4 kids, wondering what the hell happened. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I didn't want to put you in this world, Mark. I didn't want you to get caught up in it," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "But you're right. I should have told you. I should have trusted you." Mark's anger and pain bubbled to the surface. "What world, Sarah? What are you talking about? All this time, you've been keeping secrets, and I still don't know what happened. Why did you leave? Why did you think you had to disappear?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again. "It's Victor. It was always about him. The deal I made with him, it was never supposed to go this far. But he's dangerous, Mark. And I couldn't let him hurt you or the kids. I had to make a choice. And I thought I was protecting you." Mark's mind raced. "A deal? What deal? What did you get involved in?" I'm not proud of it," Sarah said, her voice filled with regret. "But I was desperate. We were struggling, and Victor offered me a way out. A way to keep you and the kids safe. But I didn't know what I was getting into. The things he does, the people he's involved with, they're not people you want to cross. But I had to, Mark. I had to choose." "Choose what?" Mark demanded. "Choose what over your family?" "I thought I was making the right choice," Sarah whispered. "But I was wrong. I thought I could disappear, that I could get away from it all. But now I see it was all a mistake." Mark's heart was heavy. He didn't know what to say. The woman he had loved, the mother of his children, had made a deal with a dangerous criminal. And she had kept it from him. But the deeper truth, the one he was finally starting to understand, was that she had made the hardest choice of all. She had chosen to protect him. And in doing so, she had made the ultimate sacrifice. "Where are you, Sarah?" Mark asked, his voice full of urgency. "I need to know. We need to talk. I need to understand what's going on. What happens next?" There was another pause, and then Sarah's voice returned, shakier than before. "I'm in hiding, Mark. I've been moving around, staying out of sight. Victor's people, they're still looking for me. They won't stop until they find me. And if they find me, they'll hurt me, and they'll hurt you too." Mark's stomach twisted in knots. "What do you mean? Are they after the kids too?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "But I won't take the risk. You have to promise me, Mark, promise me you'll stay away. Don't come looking for me. If you do, you're putting yourself and the kids in danger." The raw emotion in Sarah's voice hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He had never imagined that his life, his family's life, would be thrown into such chaos. He had always thought he was doing the right thing, trying to hold everything together. But now, it was clear that everything had been far more complicated than he had ever realized. "I can't do that, Sarah," Mark said, his voice firm. "I can't just leave you out there. Not after everything. You're my wife. We're family. I'm not giving up on you." Sarah's breath hitched on the other end of the line. "Mark, you don't understand. There's no going back from this. It's too late for me. But you can still protect the kids. Please, just promise me you'll stay away. It's the only way." Mark's heart broke. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to accept it. But deep down, he knew she was right. The life they had once known was gone. And no matter how much he wanted to fight for her, for their family, some things were beyond their control. "I'll protect the kids, Sarah," Mark said quietly. "But I can't just walk away. I'm coming for you. We'll figure this out together." He could hear Sarah's breath catch, but there was no time for more words. The line went dead, leaving Mark alone with the terrifying truth. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life with, was lost to him. The family they had once been was shattered, and the consequences of her choices were now clear. Mark looked out the window, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. The battle wasn't over. But it was just beginning. And no matter what, he would fight for his family. He had to. For their future. For Sarah.